Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily update for November 26th, I believe, 2021. I'm going to combine a series of questions to discuss the broader strategic situation today, which is very dangerous. And I've gotten questions such as, can we trust the Taliban? Why do you think you can trust the Chinese Communist Party? What's going on with Russia? Isn't there a real danger coming from Russia in Ukraine? And so on and so forth. People who essentially know that the mainstream media lies about almost everything, and yet on some level are influenced by the constant stream of propaganda, which is covered in the mainstream media, which is coming from intelligence networks, coming from diplomatic networks, that are working on behalf of the City of London and Wall Street to destroy the idea of sovereign nation states and put us under a global dictatorship. And so they're attacking sovereign states such as Russia and China, as well as the United States as a sovereign nation. They're also going after countries such as Afghanistan, which through no fault of their own was victimized by a 40-year-long war, which has made the place completely unstable and almost uninhabitable. And instead is blaming the Taliban, which is not really a worthy organization, or at least up to this point hasn't proven itself capable of running a government. But of course, there are circumstances of war and political operations, terror, financial, and so on, that have made their situation even more difficult. So I want to address the unbroken continuity of almost 60 years of what you might call deep state or shadow government policy. City of London dominated, Wall Street, now Silicon Valley. What they've done over the last 60 years that's made you justifiably skeptical about working with other nations and about the idea of cooperation. But it's also turned you against your fellow citizens through a vicious form of identity politics. And we have to get above it. We have to think strategically from the top, which is always the way Lyndon LaRouche approached every single crisis that he addressed. So let me just start with the fact that I just completed an article on the arc of history going back to the Kennedy assassination. Why have we once again seen a postponement of the release of documents, especially related to CIA activity leading up to the assassination and then afterwards? Why did Biden follow in the footsteps of virtually every other president, including Donald Trump, in not pushing for the full public disclosure of these documents? And how is that related to the fact that we still have foot dragging going on when it comes to the files being released of the FBI, CIA, and other agencies' activities in running Russiagate, the regime change coup against Donald Trump? Why have those been held back? We have the Durham investigation, which has had some promising leads. Is it going to go all the way to the top? Is it going to go after Comey, Brennan, Clapper? Will it go after the British networks of MI6 and the monarchy and the City of London that pushed the regime change against Trump because of their fear that Trump was breaking out of the control of the unilateral doctrine of geopolitics, of keeping the world at war? So will these things be revealed? And that's what I wrote in my article, which will be available on the website, my blog page at the LaRouche Organization, probably by Monday. Now, what's the issue here? Well, this 60-year period has seen an increasing stranglehold on all elements of policy by a transatlantic financial oligarchy that has networks controlling intelligence. This is what the so-called military-industrial complex is. They control academic institutions, think tanks, and of course, the media as well. And this corporate oligarchy controls strategic policy, financial policy, energy and climate policy, healthcare policy, and social policy. And of course, the narrative that backs this up is what you get every single day from the mainstream media, increasingly from social media, and also backing it up is the power of money. The fact that many people are in awe of the accumulation of billions of dollars in the hands of a few people and look to try to do that for themselves to get some security, rather than ask the question of what kind of system gives a Bill Gates or a Jeff Bezos billions of dollars to carry out evil policies, when those people who are hardworking and productive, trying to raise families, are being destroyed by the hyperinflation that's been unleashed by the financial networks tied to Bezos, Elon Musk, Gates, and others. So if you go back to the people who killed John F. Kennedy and the cover-up, the key person to look at there as a start is Allen Dulles, who was running the covert policies that Kennedy was trying to stop, who was fired by Kennedy and somehow ended up as one of the 7 commissioners of the Warren Commission report, which covered up the Kennedy assassination. And what followed? We had wars, one after another. Vietnam. We had the situation in Nicaragua, the Iran-Contra so-called, Panama, Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen, Syria, Libya. We had regime change coups that were constantly carried out, including Ukraine, by these networks. The financial side of this is the control of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and the international banks, like the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, the Bank of England, and so on, who are run by the private financial institutions that are engaged in speculative swindles with the full backing and support of the international banks. Today, their policy is the Great Reset, to give complete control not only over credit and currency policy, which they're bungling terribly, but also over spending policy under the idea that governments spend too much money and you need technocrats to stop the spending. That's not the problem. The problem is, where's the money going? It's going to the swindlers, not to the productive economy. And then, of course, you have the Green New Deal. Now, what's the goal of this network? Well, it's to enhance their own power. But how do they do it? They reduce the quality of critical thinking in the population. They divide people into smaller and smaller groups who think they have to compete with other smaller and smaller groups over a shrinking pie. They use entertainment, sports, sex, and gossip to grab the attention of people and take it away from those real issues that are accessible to the average person. I mean, understanding economics is not so difficult. If you create trillions of dollars that have nothing backing them up, put them in the hands of speculators to buy financial instruments that they buy and sell and make a profit on the purchasing, that's going to end badly. If you especially take money away from the physical economy, from production of food, production of the goods that are needed every day by people, for transportation, for healthcare, for education, you disinvest in the real physical economy, disinvest in real science, and instead push quackery, such as the Green New Deal. And you end up with a population that knows there's something wrong but can't quite put their finger on it or know the alternative. And meanwhile, the people pushing this, are pillaging the planet. Now, what we've done at the Schiller Institute is outline a series of initiatives to counter this oligarchy. And it's available on the schillerinstitute.com website, the 4 committees, and I'll just briefly identify some of what we're doing. One is Operation Ibn Sina, to turn Afghanistan from a model of the great game geopolitical wars, useless wars, meat grinder wars, into a modern nation as part of the Silk Road extending from China into Europe, into Africa and the Middle East. That's Operation Ibn Sina. Secondly, to develop a world health system so that people are not going to be starving to death or dying of preventable diseases, in which nutrition, proper food, water management, and medical care is at the center of the policy for every nation, as sovereign nations, not as globalist entities that are controlled by a supranational body, but by their own people through their institutions of the nation. rejecting the COP26 pseudoscience. Why should any country have to pay exorbitant rates for resources that are available? And why should countries go backwards to useless and inefficient technologies such as solar and wind when there are potentially almost inexhaustible supplies of energy such as nuclear fusion on the horizon? And finally, two other initiatives: Glass-Steagall as a weapon against the financial oligarchy, to stop the speculation. One of the ways to do this is to say to these speculators, you will never again be bailed out. You will eat your own losses. Instead, we're going to have national credit institutions that generate credit for real production, which is the real source of wealth for an economy. And finally, restoration of classical education and classical culture. Instead of the kind of things that the children spend hours and hours watching now, which turn their brains to mush, make them completely incapable of following through an idea with concentration. The restoration of classical culture, a culture of poetry, of music, of science, enables young people to have the confidence in their ability to make critical decisions that are necessary for the future. This is all possible. We're seeing a global rebellion. People are up in arms against this transatlantic elite. But the problem is that they're up in arms against each other. They're divided. This is the whole point of so-called critical race theory and the gender identity and religious and ethnic warfare, is to keep people fighting each other, while this succubus is planted above them as a predatory force, taking everything in its path, sucking the wealth out, and leaving people impoverished and diseased and fighting each other. This has been a brief summary of what we've been trying to do with the Schiller Institute, and we've been succeeding. We're pulling together forces internationally to discuss these issues. The idea of real diplomacy as opposed to lies, false flags, and geopolitics. The idea of real science as opposed to the quackery of the COP26. All these things are possible. And I'd urge you to take some time this weekend to go to the schillerinstitute.com website, the laroucheorganization.com website, read through some of the articles, watch some of the videos, and make a decision that you'll join us. And by joining us, I mean become members of our associations. Go out and fight for these ideas. Don't fall for the lies that are trying to pit us into wars against other nations or against each other. That's the strategy of an oligarchy, which is desperately trying to keep you from figuring out, not just that you've been played, but that you have a pathway out of that game into being a citizen, building a real, reliable, safe future for yourself and your children. So thanks for joining me. Pass this video on to others, share it, get the discussion going, and I'll see you again next week.